Time for another episode of the Election Whisperer. And guess what I have for you? Oh my God, such a treat. I have a special episode today. I have Joaquin Castro, that's right, the Joaquin Castro, Congressman from Texas 6th District, special guesting or special co-hosting an episode with me today that is focused squarely on Latino voters. I am just so pleased that the congressman donated his time to come on to the Election Whisperer and basically take over for me. You're going to see an interview segment coming up in which the congressman takes the lead, interviewing two very, very awesome and really just extraordinary guests, both of whom have much better knowledge about the Latino electorate than I do. I have better knowledge than the average American, certainly, and even better than probably the average political analysis, I would argue, but not the level these two have. So I'm really excited to let the three of them, because the congressman too is very intimately familiar with the Latino electorate, have a conversation, in-depth, uninterrupted, kind of like being in the room where it happens, right? You've always wondered kind of what would happen in these high-level rooms where really smart people get together and they talk about really smart things. So I wanted to take you into one of those rooms and let a conversation unfold that you would get to witness. And I also wanted to keep myself kind of uninterrupted as much as possible because, again, these guys know more about this particular topic than I do. You're going to get to hear these great, in-depth, detailed conversations. Let me tell you about the other people in the room. Stephanie is basically a public opinion. She calls herself the fiery Latina, so you know that was something that piqued my interest. And the first time I ever saw her was when she came and brought one of her public opinion surveys on Latino voters onto the morning show panel, and I perked right up with that kind of label because, I love women that are proud of who they are and don't try to diminish themselves. So Stephanie caught my eye right away, and she runs Equis Labs, which is a Latino public opinion firm. It's one of a couple that focus just on Latino public opinion, but I think she has the biggest. I think what she says is she has the biggest Latino public opinion data set in the country, and she's going to take us into some of that data, into some of the insights that she's gleaned from it about Latino voters, which will be the biggest minority group, by the way, in the country very soon if they're not already. And the other guest that I have is Chuck Rocha, who was Bernie Sanders, who I know a lot of you guys are big fans of. He was Bernie Sanders' senior advisor. He did a lot of things on the Sanders campaign, but one of the other things or most important things for this show that he did was he oversaw the Latino outreach program. And in particular, the Nevada outreach program that was so successful. And it really did kind of dispel, or I would say destroy, the stupid myth that, Latino voters simply won't vote, which is a dumb myth because obviously there's nothing special about Latino voters that makes them impervious to the voter treatments that other groups are subjected to. And in fact, there's a rich political science research on this topic that, I intend to bring some of my favorite political scientists, some of them are women, onto the show at a later date to talk about. So Chuck is here to bring us into that campaign and into the organizations that he has built to kind of fill the hole that sadly is still there in terms of Democratic Party infrastructure for Latino voting. So it is just an amazing conversation. You're going to notice I'm kind of hovering outside of it, and I'm very happy to be there in the room where it happens, and I'm happy that I can give you guys a hall pass as well. So we're going to move into that interview, and afterwards we're going to come back out and do some this week trivia answer. But I will say we're not going to be doing Q&A this week. It's a very good but very long interview segment, and I don't want quitters. So just so you know, you're going to get trivia, and that's about it. So enjoy the interview, and I'll see you on the other side. We're back at the Election Whisperer, and boy, do I have a show for you today. I have been counting the days to this episode because this episode is so important. It is, I think, instrumental to the future of elections in America because we're going to be talking today about one of the most important voting blocks in American elections, and it is one that has just chronically under-examined. It has baffled my mind since I began studying American elections and the electorate as a graduate student at the University of Georgia, why not a massive amount more attention is paid to the rising Latina population in America. This is a voting bloc that a lot of American population demographically, by the way, is stagnant. When we look at white voters, it's actually a little bit of a decline in terms of its population size. But when we look at minorities, the African American population is pretty stagnant. There's a little bit of growth in the Asian population, especially when you look at Asian Americans from traditional Asian countries, with a little bit of growth when we look at more like Indian American type immigration. But when we look specifically at Latino American population growth, it is really, really growing strong. And it is yet, increasing every 10 years in the census. Their population growth is increasing, in massive amounts, and their voter population growth is increasing so much, especially in the southwest part of the country. And yet you just don't hear a lot of conversation about what Latino voters are thinking, what their issue preferences are. We do know that they tend to vote for Democrats, but there's actually a lot of heterogeneity in Latino voting patterns, especially in the state of Florida, and actually really in Texas as well. And we don't know exactly, what is going on with Latino turnout, right? We do know that Latino turnout has lagged behind African American turnout and white turnout, even though, we have seen increases in other minority group turnout. So I think it's so important to have this episode today and bring in some of the best informed, biggest experts in Latino voting in America and talk about this voting demographic, especially as it relates to the 2020 election and Democratic politics, and to the efforts of Democrats to win some of these really high profile contests. I think specifically, Texas, Florida, Arizona. I mean, these are some of the best contests that we'll see in terms of competition on the map this year. So I have some great guest today. I've got Congressman Joaquin Castro. He is the congressman from Texas, District 20, which overlaps on the San Antonio area. And, obviously, as a sitting member of Congress, his experience is going to be from elected to constituents, right? But I think it's going to be fantastic because he's going to lead a conversation with two experts who have been doing two very distinct types of work in the field of Latino voters. I have Chuck Rocha, who served in, he was political director for Bernie Sanders' campaign, and he ran the whole operation, but he also ran, in particular, some really great work that dealt with Latino voters, and specifically in Nevada, that I want to highlight in this interview, because it was the first time, I think, that really you saw an effective outreach campaign get put into work and deployed in a Democratic campaign. Because honestly, I don't think we've ever seen until Chuck's execution and his team, obviously, in the Bernie Sanders campaign, a real articulated effort to connect with the Latino population on issues that move them, in ways that move them. And I really am excited to have Chuck talk to us about how he came up with the strategy and how he deployed it there, and what other Democratic campaigns might learn by looking at the Bernie Sanders 2020 Latino outreach campaign that he was so instrumental in designing. I also have Stephanie Valencia, who works for Equis, which is a Latino public opinion firm. And their research is amazing. I first found out about Stephanie because she brought a survey that they had done onto the Morning Joe panel. And it was one of those moments back when I had my DVR where I paused the TV and I went and I got my phone. I followed her on Twitter. I actually was like, oh, I got to get a hold of her and talk to her about Latino public opinion, because nobody had been surveying them in this big data set way. So she's got this huge data set that she's been building with her company for a long time, really diving deep into Latino political attitudes and Latino voters. And I hope that she's going to take us a little bit into that data today and show us a good peek into what that data suggests, because I think there's a lot of nuance that we don't know or hear about, and we can't really hear or know about it, because usually when we talk about Latino voting, we get maybe 3 minutes on an MSNBC panel to do so, and it's just not enough time. So I'm really excited to have both those guests on and to have Congressman Castro volunteer to lead the discussion, because I think it really takes somebody who is in the community to lead that discussion more effectively than I can as somebody who's not. So I'm going to be here to kind of guide and listen and kind of throw in some, voter behavior questions here and there. But by and large, I'm really excited to just kind of listen in and hear what these experts have to say and teach us about this great and rising demographic in America. So what we're going to do is we're going to have each of the guests quickly introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what they're doing currently, because they have so much in their resume. It's such a great background and really impressive resume. I wanted them to have an opportunity to kind of share that with you and also highlight the things that they think are most important that you should know about. So we're going to start off and let the congressman introduce himself, and then he can lead off to the rest of the panel.
Well, first, thank you, Rachel. Thank you for having me as co-host for this week's podcast. It's great to be on with Chuck and Stephanie, both experts in their respective fields. I'm Joaquin Castro, and I represent the great city of San Antonio, Texas, in the House of Representatives. And I'm in my 4th term now, and I served before that for 5 terms in the Texas legislature. And I have a twin brother who's much uglier than I am, Julian Castro, who served as mayor of San Antonio and then HUD secretary under President Obama. And then, of course, I was chair of his presidential campaign this past year, and very happy to be on with you all.
That's great. And if you could then introduce, Stephanie, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. I'm Stephanie Valencia. I'm the founder and CEO of 2 organizations, Equis Labs, which is a C4 organization, and Equis Research, which is a research organization that both are intended to create a better understanding of the Latino electorate and invest in new and innovative approaches to reach and engage them. So we're both a research and experimentation hub to find new ways to reach Latino voters, especially because our electorate is so young. I've spent the last 15 years or so at the intersection of Latino political empowerment and leadership development and technology and innovation. And so I bring both of those perspectives to the work that we do at Equis.
Yeah, it's going to be so excellent. And now, Chuck, please.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Rachel, for having me with my good friends, with 2 people that I look up to a whole lot, with the congressman and with Stephanie. My name is Chuck Rocha. I grew up in East Texas. This is my 31st year of working on campaigns. It really makes me seem old, but I'm really not that old. I started when I was 10 working on campaigns. That's a joke. I've been doing this a long damn time. I'm the president of a consulting firm called Solidarity Strategies. What makes us different is we're the largest Latino owned and operated consulting firm in the country. One of my proudest achievements is there's been 100 young brown and black kids come through my firm in 10 years. So we're also an incubator/consulting firm, and we're really, really proud of that. I was fortunate and honored to serve as a senior advisor to Bernie Sanders on his presidential campaign in 2020, and also be one of his lead consultants in 2016. After leaving the campaign, going back to the firm, we created Nuestro PAC. Nuestro PAC is the largest Latino-operated super PAC in the country that does partisan outreach. There's lots of great C3s and C4s doing amazing work, but we are the super PAC part of that, going out and talking to Latinos about why Democrats are better than Republicans. And to date, we've spent more money on Spanish TV and digital than any other presidential campaign or super PAC. And I'm super duper excited to tell you that my new book, T.O. Bernie, is on pre-sale at www.toburneybook.com, where you can buy it today. Well, that outlines all of the Latino strategies behind the scenes of the campaign, what happened in the room, some of my personal journey from a Mexican redneck in East Texas to Bernie. But then I guess I would close with my proudest achievement is being the father of Charles Rocha and being the grandfather of Wyatt and Rowan Rocha. Those are my greatest accomplishments.
Very good. I am absolutely counting the days till your book comes out. I cannot wait to read it. There's certainly nothing like it on the market. So I really urge everybody to buy the book and read it. And I'm looking forward to that. So great. All right. Well, I'm going to turn the interviewing lead over to the congressman. He, of course, as a sitting elected official, is quite good at, I think, leading discussion. And also it hides my terrible mutilation of all things, language. There's no language I don't mutilate, including the English language, which is why I was always, kind of hesitant to make fun of George W. Bush when he mutilated the English language, because I am so guilty. I can't even say the word nuclear right, So I'm going to let the congressman take over, and I'm going to be here to join in, and I'm really excited. Let's get this conversation going.
Chuck and Stephanie, as we've heard coming into 2020, Latinos for the first time ever will be the largest minority voting bloc in the 2020 elections. And that has a great deal of consequences for both the Democratic and the Republican parties. But there's something even more fundamental than that I want to talk about for a second. And it's a story that I shared with Joe Biden about a week ago. And the story was this. I'm chairman of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and recently we've been doing a lot of work on diversity and inclusion. And we were meeting with the Association of American Publishers, and we had on the line one of the CEOs of one of the top 5 publishing companies in the country and one of the largest in the nation. And I asked him a very fundamental but simple question. I asked him whether he could name 3 Latinos or Latinas who have made significant contributions to American history. He thought about it for a second, and after a few seconds, he said that no, he couldn't. And I don't think he was being rude or dismissive. I think he simply didn't have any idea about the contributions of Latinos or Latinas to American history. And so it raises a fundamental question that I think is important to start out with. And it raises the issue that there are a lot of folks, including some who may be listening to this podcast, that really don't have a sense for who Latinos are in America or where they fit in to American society. I know we're going to talk about Latino voting trends and whether they prefer Joe Biden or Donald Trump. But first, Stephanie, give us a sense. I know you've done a lot of research, but just give us a sense as a Latina yourself. Also, who is the Latino community in this country?
Well, the Latino community in this country is very diverse. We are 60 million strong. We are growing very rapidly in this country. There will be 32 million eligible Latino voters in the upcoming election in 2020, as you mentioned, the largest minority voting bloc. We are getting bigger, not smaller. Every 30 seconds, a Latino turns 18 in this country. And Rachel alluded to this in the prelude as the growth of the population, but that growth is not being driven by new immigration to this country, despite what people may think. It is actually being driven by US-born Latinos. So the fact of the matter is 2020's election for a critically important election for the Latino community, given how much under attack we have been by this president and the rhetoric of this president and his allies. But because we are going to be growing and being a factor in electoral politics moving forward, we are deeply, deeply diverse. I'm 11th generation New Mexican as I sit here in southern New Mexico, close to the US-Mexico border. But I'm very different, and what matters to me may matter, maybe different issues than matter to a young Puerto Rican woman in Central Florida, or an older Cuban American male in South Florida, or a newly or first generation Latino immigrant in North Carolina or Wisconsin. So our community is deeply, deeply diverse. And over the course of the last year, through our work at Equis Research, we have done multiple waves of polling in 10 states that has really given us both a longitudinal and really deep sense of the nuance of the electorate, where we see key breaks in support for Democrats and Republicans, where we see important cleavages around issues or also around motivation and turnout and excitement about participating in the election. So I'm really excited to jump into those a lot today. Gender and age, I'll give just a quick preview, are two of the most important factors for Democratic support, but there's a lot of work to do as it relates to increasing excitement and motivation about turnout. And there's a lot of voter education that needs to be done to increase the levels of actual turnout, especially among Latinas, but we'll get more into that later.
And I want to ask Chuck about that for a second, because Chuck, you are the practitioner here. You helped Bernie in 2016, helped even more, had a bigger role in 2020. And years ago, about 3 or 4 decades ago, there was an old adage in politics that Latinos were the sleeping giant, large in number, but in terms of voting, there wasn't much voting going on. And over the years, campaigns have wrestled with how much to invest in trying to get Latinos to vote. And going into 2016 and 2020, you were absolutely committed to getting your candidate, Bernie Sanders, to do that. And as it turns out, in the primary with great success. Tell us about that.
So I knew what you knew, Congressman, and that me, you, and Stephanie, and a bunch of us had been, screaming from the mountaintops for a long time that we weren't a silent majority and that we weren't a sleeping giant, that we were a giant that nobody had ever really spoken to or taken the time to come to our community and make that connection. Because in our world, there's a group of establishment class consultants who said it's all about return on investment. And because of data and micro targeting, we have taken an infrequent Latino voter or a young Latino voter, and we put them in a category of not a prime voter. So most of these underfunded campaigns do not spend any money on a voter who they feel like is not going to have a large return on investment. We turn that on its head and started with the targeting and started talking to a broad swath, when I say we, the Bernie Sanders campaign, of a group of Latinos who had never been talked to. What Stephanie was alluding to about gender and about age, you have to remember that the Latino voter is 10 years younger than the average voter in America because we're just a newer demographic. We're younger, we're coming of age quickly. So there's a lot of young Latinos and not a whole bunch of older Latinos. So then that means that the old style of communicating through TV commercials and things that get to old folks is not something that normally will get to a bilingual community that's 10 years younger than the normal community. So you have to think about this operation completely different. And because I was so blessed and so honored to be in a room where I got to make the decisions on a budget or be able to protect a budget and then start early, I knew that we had to go there, target broadly, start really, really early, and make a cultural connections with Brown consultants, with Brown staff around issues that would draw them to an old Jewish man from Vermont who you would think would have no connection to this community. That was kind of our secret formula to getting there.
I just want to double click on one thing that Chuck said real quick, Joaquin, which is, Democrats, one of the things that I think we have as a party have gotten wrong is we've had a very binary approach of how we look at Latino engagement. Chuck, everything Chuck said is right. There's a historical way of kind of looking at the highest propensity voters. So young Latino voters who, again, every 30 seconds, one of us is turning 18. The median age of Latinos today is 28 years old. We don't have that kind of electoral voting history because we're just newer voters. So we naturally get left out of political calculations. And again, kind of coming back to the binary approach of that Democrats have really long relied on, you're either Cuban American, and we treat Cubans like a very particular way, and then we treat everybody a different way, right? There is no nuance by state. There is no nuance in trying to talk to different people in different ways. And one of the things that I think is critically important in this moment in time is, you've got television as a medium for communication, you have radio, you have the traditional modes of communication, but digital and reaching people through digital actually allows you to find that young Latina who is Puerto Rican in Central Florida versus the older Cuban American male who's in Miami, and you can reach them with different kinds of content that may speak to them. The last point I would just make is we were leaving tons of votes on the table as Democrats. And in 2016, we really learned that the hard way, which in a place like Texas, the margin of victory in 2016 was a little bit over 807,000 votes. When you tabulate the number of Latinos who are either voted third party, were registered and did not vote and chose to sit out that election, or were eligible and didn't register. 807,000 was the margin of victory in Texas. That number of adding up those three categories, nearly 3 million. You go to Arizona, the margin of victory was 91,000.
Yes.
The number of eligible voters who could have voted or who sat out or who were left unregistered, close to 645,000. And then the last one that I will just leave because it leaves such a sting is Michigan. 10,000 votes was the margin of victory in 2016. 134,000 Latinos either voted third party or sat out the election or were eligible and didn't register. So there, so many voters are packing the sidelines and they're not being talked to, so we're not bringing them off.
You're
That's
right, Stephanie. That Michigan example does sting a lot.
It does. And I'm just going to interject really quick and say, this on the other side, their electioneering model does not do this. Like, they do not leave players on the field, on the bench.
Exactly.
Yeah. And y'all have both identified, I think, what has been a fatal flaw in a lot of campaigns, presidential and otherwise, over the years, which is campaigns, because of limited time and limited money, tend to target people who are already consistent voters. Well, in the Latino community, that leaves out a lot of people. And so it turns into a wrestling match with campaign managers and others, ad folks, about how much money do you actually spend to go after a voter that you don't know necessarily is going to go out and vote. And I want to tell you a quick story about being on the west side of San Antonio, which is about 90% Mexican American. I was at a bakery near my mom's house, and I asked a man around election time a few years ago if he was going to vote. And he told me that he wanted to vote, but he didn't know what the candidate stood for. There is sometimes, I think, a very basic lack of voter education, because when you don't vote, you're not getting the door knocks, you're not getting the phone calls, you're not getting the mail pieces, you're not getting the robocalls even from the campaigns. And all of that just builds on itself. And in the past, it's turned out that when you don't target people at all, including many in the Latino community, they don't come out and vote. And so, Chuck, how hard was it to go in there and actually convince the campaign, the Bernie Sanders campaign, look, even though y'all raised a lot of money with limited resources and limited time, we've got to go after the Latino community and get them to vote?
It's one of the reasons, Congressman, that I wrote the book, right? I wanted to let the rank and file folks see behind the curtains. I mean, me and Stephanie, and I keep referring to it because we've been through this for so long, fighting with campaigns, is that I wanted to document this. And so I tell the stories honestly, without burning people down, about folks in our own campaign that said Latinos don't vote. Those words were uttered to one of the senior staff to a reporter, because the reporter came back and told me that, because I knew that person was trying to sabotage what I was doing, because I was getting a lot of headway and had a lot of free space because I was the senior advisor. That don't make them bad. They were trying to protect Bernie, and they thought what I was doing was going to waste money by going after a group of people who don't vote.
Right.
They weren't going to say that to me because I wear this hat proudly and I might have knocked them out. But I wanted them to know that this is what we were going to do. So it wasn't easy. But luckily, early on, and here's something else in the book that's not widely reported, is that we started doing polling, and I look at Stephanie again because you should be driven by going and talking to the community and listening to them, that when you gave Bernie Sanders' message to a group of people across America in Iowa, they got it, right? So white people moved this much, let's say it's 5 points. Black people moved this much, it was 4 points. And Latinos, who you were giving the same message that you were giving to that white voter and that black voter, moved 12 points. So for the mathematicians in that room, I said, why invest in these people that were only moving 5% first? Let's first look at the group that were moving 12%. Somebody then may say, well, Chuck, they don't vote. And I'm like, you don't know that because nobody's ever talked to them as early as we're having this discussion, Congressman, probably 10 months before Iowa when we did the first rounds of polling, right? And to prove the point, again, this is in the book, that when we first did a poll in Nevada, Joe Biden was beating Bernie Sanders with Latinos by 6 points. By caucus day, we won 73%, if you believe the UCLA independent study.
That was incredible.
Of the vote. Yeah. Now, that was not done because, like people say, we had a bunch of Zoom meetings or that we had connections to the community or because we had certain people endorse us. It's because I spent $2.4 million over 9 months. And the first time I talked to voters in Nevada was in Spanish. The first time we opened up an office, it was in East Las Vegas. The first time we hired a field director, she was Latina and bilingual. It's all the things that I had known that we had complained about. I had a real-time chance to do it in real time. So we kind of threw everything that normally a campaign would do to white suburban women to Latinos, and it worked brilliant.
Stephanie, in a second, I want to ask you, turning to the general election in 2020. But before we get to that, I think it's important to ask the question, Chuck, you said that Bernie's message moved Latinos by 12 points, which was way more than any of the other groups. And so, well, either to Stephanie or to Chuck, what was it about Bernie's message that you think resonated so much with Latinos in particular in this country?
Yeah, I'll make 3 real quick points on this because Chuck and I studied Chuck's work from afar. Obviously, he was a great evangelizer about the work, but we really looked at the numbers and saw what bore out. And I think what's interesting about it is that there's actually a lot that is fairly replicable, right? Like there were 3 things that we kind of boiled down, 3 or 4 things that we boiled down Bernie's support in the Latino community to. One was the man, which Tio Bernie, like the persona of Tio Bernie that Chuck helped to create, that relatability of who he was to the community. That's something that's probably not super replicable, but was something that was like intrinsic to who he was. Then there was the movement, right? And the movement that Chuck and the team built, and Bernie built, which is about not me, but us, and something that was about a collective, bigger vision than the individual candidate himself. And that is something that I think was very Obama-esque and was very important for people to see themselves inside a movement. I always point out that we did a study of all of the ads targeting Latino voters in Nevada during the caucuses, and Bernie's ad there was, they had an English ad targeting Latinos, a Spanish language ad targeting Latinos, and both of them didn't have him in the video at all, in the ad at all. It was all about the supporters of his movement. It was all about working class people, young people, brown people. Everybody else was talking about and pounding their chest about their bio. His was about his movement. And then third was the issues. And there was a set of issues that I think he really tapped into the challenges and hopes and dreams of Latino voters with free community college. We know that our community, uses and takes advantage of community college more than other populations do and rely on community college degrees more than others. Healthcare and Medicare for all. We saw in Texas ahead of the primary that healthcare was the top issue for Latino voters. And when asked about what kind of a healthcare plan they wanted Medicare for all. And then of course, immigration. And immigration, I always say, is a litmus test for Latino voters. It's always kind of a gateway to kind of see, is this person with us or not with us? Do they see our community and understand our community? And obviously, I think Bernie really tapped a chord with Latinos. The thing that I will say that relates to 2020, though, is that Chuck talked a lot about the set of voters that they started talking to that nobody else was talking to. And at Equis, we're calling that set of voters an ambivalent voter, which is they're not definitively for Biden and they're not definitively for Trump. And there's a huge swath of those in the middle. They are definitely anti-Trump, but they're just not for Biden yet. And that is the universe of voters that we have to go out and convince we're not persuading them to vote for a Democrat. We're actually just persuading them to actually vote. And I think that is the work that we've really got to kind of figure out over the coming weeks and months is how do we motivate that set of folks who are currently on the sidelines, who are, again, deeply anti-Trump, but not yet pro-Biden.
And as you all know, Joe Biden has been leading in almost every public poll that's been out there, sometimes by double digits. And there's a concern that Democrats could get too comfortable and not really, work the Latino community, not really work some of the communities that they should. And so my question is, what is Joe Biden, what do the Democrats need to do to make sure that they close this thing out? We've still got a few months, obviously, but where do they go from here to make sure that Joe Biden is elected the next president?
I'm going to leave the issue set and the strategy part around the polling and focus groups to Stephanie because she's got some amazing research on this. And I'm actually using myself with Nuestro PAC. That is very important to 2020. But as a general strategy, Congressman, I'll tell you the way I've been thinking about it is I'm not as worried about Joe Biden because I think there's enough people like Valencia, there's enough people like me and others out there that will get enough money to spend enough money on TV and digital and mail to make sure that people know who Joe Biden is, hopefully. Right? Like I think that there'll be money flowing. We've already spent over $2 million with Nuestro PAC to try to help Joe Biden. So I said that there, that I'm not taking that for granted, but I know there'll be some spending there. What really today concerns me, Congressman, are the Senate races and the congressional races. Because I think that all of these funders are focused on making sure to deliver Joe Biden, and they should. We have to get rid of Donald Trump. But if you think about Senate races in Colorado, Senate races in North Carolina, Senate races in places where people don't think about Latinos all the time, there's no spending happening to date and haven't yet talking to Latinos there. And the campaigns, because of what we just described, won't spend a lot of money because they're run by the same group of folks who've always done this horribly wrong by waiting till the last 2 weeks, Google translating their English ad saying they run a Latino program. That's not how you do this. But then also thinking about the House races like Debbie Mercosur-Powell, Xochitl Torres-Small, Gilbert Cisneros, and all these places, not to mention Texas 23 in our backyard, Congressman, like who's spending that money in Spanish there? I worry about the down ballot races right now. And Stephanie can talk to the amazing research that they have found that I'm actually using.
Yeah, well, what I would say, what's troubling to me, I agree with Chuck on the focus on the Senate races, but I do still have a lot of concern about what's happening at the top of the ticket. As you mentioned, Congressman, polling looks really great right now. Biden is still underperforming with Latino voters, and that is concerning to me because there's still close to 100 days until the election. A lot can happen in those 100 days. And again, while Biden is doing very well with white swing voters, there's any moment where those white swing voters could potentially swing back. There's a reason they're called swing voters, could swing back to Trump. And that is very concerning to me because in this community, close to 40% of Latinos did not have a strong, in our polling, did not have a strongly formed opinion of Joe Biden. Of course, they know he was vice president for 8 years, but they can't name and articulate a policy or like what his vision is for the country right now. And that is very troubling for me because while Latino voters are deeply, deeply anti-Trump, and we'll show a slide that shows how deeply anti-Trump, it's almost we can't be more anti-Trump than our community is right now. They are not yet pro-Biden. And what concerns me is if they do not become pro-Biden, being anti-Trump may not be enough to get them to the polls.
I think, there is this debate, right? Is it enough that Latinos are so anti-Trump and still upset that he called Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals? Well, whatever the debate is there, it's clear that at least in his mind and the campaign's mind for Donald Trump, they haven't given up on the idea that they can shave off a percentage of the Latino vote. He invited AMLO, the Mexican president, to come to the White House. They made a big deal about it. He's competing in places like your home state of New Mexico, obviously Arizona and Florida. So what do y'all see as the prospects for Donald Trump actually shaving off some margin of Latino vote?
Well, I think that Donald Trump's goal is not to win the Latino vote. And I think even just shaving stuff off at the margins is what his goal is. And I don't even think people are going to go to Trump. I think the idea is to muddy the waters enough that they just stay home. And that is why I think we've created this new sense around, for Latino voters, there's this kind of, in electoral politics, you either are doing persuasion or turnout. And what our argument is that with Latino voters, you're not persuading in the traditional sense of persuading them to vote for a Democrat, because again, they're already there. What you're doing is persuading them to turn out and persuading them and giving them a reason to go out and vote, rather than persuading around the actual candidate. And that's what the work that we think needs to get done right now.
And can I interject? I mean, that's really too like what my research is about. It's, it's a persuasion to turn out, and like the Republican bucket of mobilize or like high propensity Republicans doesn't just get ignored the way that the Democratic bucket writ large does. It doesn't get, in many of these campaigns, it gets no treatment at all. It gets no stimulus, no direct outreach, which is one of the reasons that, in these important down ballot races, you get these drop off problems where a Democrat will show up and vote for the president and then leave the House race blank or the state house race blank. So the idea that there isn't, it just baffles me that there would not be like a cognizant, coherent understanding that like you could handicap the GOP by investing heavily in Latino mobilization, and that it would not have been a plan for like, okay, whoever this party nominee is, if it's Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, whoever it is, like we are going to invest massively in Latino turnout, because there's populations in Michigan to Texas. And I mean, especially in Texas, right? If they don't understand that you have to be focusing on Latino turnout, and the Trump campaign's working on, I mean, their messaging to them. Like if you're not focusing on that, then that's the key to flipping those state house races down there, those, House of Representative seats. It's so critical. Like, how could that, it's just so obvious. So help me understand. I understand that you guys have been shouting into a void for years. And I get maybe why that was a void 5 years ago, but to still be a void today, to this cycle, to 2020, it is absolutely baffling.
Ooh, pick me.
Go ahead.
So I can tell you exactly why it is. First, let me go back and answer the congressman with some facts here on what's happening today. So I'm tracking every dollar that's spent on Spanish to try to get an idea where the campaigns are spending, and I can monitor that in real time. And as of this morning, Donald Trump has spent $1.4 million in Spanish language TV. That don't count what he's done in digital. That don't count any, but in regular Spanish, Univision, Telemundo TV, $1.4 million. In comparison, the Biden campaign has spent $300,000 on Spanish TV.
That is so depressing. That makes me just want, I know everybody who watches this episode, at this point of this episode, is going to literally be screaming at their computer screen, Chuck. Like, how can it be that we can all know this? You obviously, but like they, and yet the Biden team doesn't. They should be at millions of dollars in Spanish investment.
Sure. And it's and this me and Stephanie have been talking about, and that's why I created Nuestro PAC, because I couldn't rely or wait on the consultants around Joe Biden. So I would even include Stephanie and a group of friends who've been trying to make sure there's enough money spent in our community. So I have now made Joe Biden be at parity with Donald Trump through the spending that I'm doing at Nuestro. So like, I'm not waiting on Joe Biden. I'm literally running ads that look like Joe Biden ads that compare Donald Trump to Joe Biden and what Joe Biden's going to do for the Latino community on those Spanish language stations. But I'm just running them in a number of like 3 states. I'm in Michigan, I'm in Arizona, I'm in North Carolina, where you look at the Trump ads. This is back to the strategy, and the congressman will smile because he'll know what he's doing. Most of this money is being spent in Florida, right? Because he knows he has to have Florida, or there's no path to victory for him. So like, I'm monitoring this. I'm trying to raise dollars. Stephanie's trying to help me raise dollars, and the whole community. Like, we're all coming together to be like, we have to do this piece. But today, that's where we are with the actual spend.
It's just, red alarm, right? Obviously people need to send money as much as they humanly possibly can to Chuck's organization.
I love you, Rachel.
I love you too, Chuck.
Well, and I know that we're running short on time here, so I want to ask you all, I think, what is going to be a very consequential question and issue for 2020, but then also for beyond 2020. And it's something that has bubbled up in the last few presidential election cycles. So presidential campaigns still consider the main battleground states, besides Florida, to be in the Midwest. You talk about Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania. And this isn't necessarily an either or, but you do get a sense during a presidential campaign and a presidential election where the campaigns feel they really need to compete, what the swing states are, where they're going to make sure they put a lot of resources. So over the years, there's been an argument about an emerging group of swing states: Arizona, Texas, Georgia, which those are in addition to Nevada, for example. When do you think, is it 2020 or is it beyond 2020, that the main focus shifts from the Midwest states over to the Sun Belt states?
Well, I think it's always going to be a both and. I think this year we are going to see, we're seeing Arizona in play in a much more real way than we ever have before. The thing that still concerns me there is that we are not seeing the levels of support for Biden that we need to. He needs to be in the low to mid, pushing mid to high 70s in terms of support, and he's not close to that right now. In fact, he is underperforming the Senate candidate Mark Kelly there right now among Latino voters. So huge level of concern, because Latinos will be a critical path to victory in Arizona. But I'm just going to point out Michigan, Wisconsin, and North Carolina, just demographically kind of what it means. Both when it comes to the gender gap, as I mentioned, gender is one of the most defining factors for Democratic support. Latinas are deeply, deeply anti-Trump, and two of the places where they are most deeply anti-Trump are Michigan and Wisconsin. And these are mostly younger women. I think what we've seen in those states, because there's such an emerging electorate there, it is small but rapidly growing, is that you have now children of eligible immigrants who came to this country, who maybe came to work in the auto industry or any of the agricultural industries in those states, and had children, and those children are now eligible to vote, because the population in those states, Latino eligible population in those states, very much trends younger, and they're far, far more progressive. And so again, when we see like the numbers back to 2016 and the margins of victory in those states, it would be crazy not to have an aggressive and again, high return on investment, as we were talking about with Chuck earlier. Folks are always looking for high return on investment. Those states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and North Carolina, are places where there would be really high return on investment, given how deeply anti-Trump the Latino electorate is there.
Chuck?
And ask me the question again so I get it right. Joaquin.
Yeah.
Congressman.
So there's been a debate over the years about, whether to continue to focus on the Midwest states, mostly Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, or whether you shift a lot of your focus over to the competitive Sun Belt states. Is that going to happen in 2020, or does it happen later on?
I think the census is going to drive a lot of that, because me and you're going to see that natural growth that we've been seeing as Texas has continued to pick up congressional districts, Georgia. Like, they will probably follow the numbers, but back to what Rachel asked a while ago about, there's just a small group of people who, none of which are Latino, or I would mind you, are Black, who run all of the higher end parts of all of this campaigning, right? And they just don't understand, not that they don't care, but there's a nuance of understanding the community. Everybody who does what me and Stephanie does has learned this from watching a book. You have this certain thing that you always do around polling, and then your persuadable universe, your GOTV universe. Like, I keep going back to that, but that's been the reason that all of these people never get talked to, Congressman. Back in the days when you were a city councilman and I was working for Ciro Rodriguez on the south side of San Antonio, we had
my brother was a city councilman. I was a state rep.
State rep, I mean.
Happens to you all the time. I know.
I knew he was a state rep.
I'm sure I'll do it eventually.
So if we were down on Military Drive, we had a clipboard and we were talking to every house, right? Because we knew in that neighborhood, in that precinct, I needed every vote for Cito. You needed every vote for your state rep race, right? Well, that never, ever happens now. I'm not saying you got to go knock on every door and it's highly inefficient. I get all of those arguments, but think about that in what Stephanie's talking about with digital advertising.
Right.
There's a way to reach all of those with a digital door knock where you're not eliminating people just because they have not voted. When that starts happening, it becomes a lot more easy to win these states.
Yeah, Chuck, can I interrupt you? Because this is from the outsider's perspective, right? This has been my hypothesis. There's this small core constituency of high-end consultants that get to work a Democratic presidential campaign, a Clinton campaign, a Kerry campaign, a Biden campaign. And I'm not trying to insult the people that are in this group. I'm just saying that there probably, and this is, I don't even know, many of the people who they are. I've actually have always understood the Republican network a little bit better for some reason. But anyway, my guess is that many of them are white men, and there's an entropy going on in there, in which there is they understood the electorate a certain way because the 1990s, it was a certain way. As an expert in voter behavior and polarization, there was a campaign mechanism and strategy that worked very well in the 80s and the 90s when these men were coming of age. But that time period has passed, and the techniques and the technologies have changed as well. And this core group has not adapted well to them. And there really needs to be a broadening out of the core brain trust. And the reason I say that, Chuck, let me use this alliteration, and hopefully my viewers won't say, you didn't let him talk. Let me use this little story. When the George Floyd murders happened and the riots and the looting broke out, every other analyst almost. Oh, well, this is probably going to hurt Biden. There's going to be white backlash. And I said, no, dude. Okay, number one, Nixon was a challenger, not an incumbent. People look at Trump and they see him as the source of chaos, not the solution, A. And B, like white liberals there's a lot of liberalization in racial attitudes of white people. Okay, this is not the white electorate of 1968, and I got poo-pooed. Okay, of course I did, because I always do. And within a week, what happens? Biden's lead expands. Right, it grows bigger, and I get proven right by the data and reality of Black Lives Matter becoming a majority movement from the 40s to the 60s in public support. And I have no doubt that the 4 or 5 people I envision in my head that have access to Joe Biden's ear were all telling him, oh man, this is going to be bad. This is going to blow up for you. It's going to be bad. And if I had been there, I would have been able to tell him, no, actually, this is not going to be bad. This, people don't look at Donald Trump, I promise you, and see him as a solution to, racial strife and chaos. Like they see him as the source, right? And, I just think like there's at the top, like they need to diversify racially, intellectually, ethnically, genderly, and until that happens, we're just not going to see effective campaign electioneering. And that's my soapbox. Thanks for listening.
All right. Well, I want to thank both of you for all of the work that you all have put in over the years. And also for everything that you're doing to help the country understand Latino voters and where they fit into the 2020 election and beyond. Thank you.
This is so huge. Yeah, thanks. I mean, this was exactly, Joaquin, you did such a great job. Like when I thought of the episode, this is exactly what I was hoping to bring to the audience, like an opportunity for them to hear from someone other than, me, that there's this huge gap and that, people are doing strong, good work in it that they can support through donations, that they can support through reading it, through sharing it on their Twitter and Facebook and social media feeds, and getting involved, directly in. So, and I know now, like for people who watch the show, that they're going to have a much more nuanced understanding of where Latino voting is, public opinion is, and I'm so stoked on how this came out. You guys just killed it, and I'm so glad I got to listen to it. Yeah, thank you so much.
So, that said, let me give you guys each one opportunity to remind these, viewers and listeners who you are, where you are, what you've got coming out, where they can see your data or your book, get your book, or give money to your organizations. Okay. And Chuck, why don't you go first?
Rachel, thank you again for having me, and thanks everybody for tuning in today. If you want more information about the book, the book is on pre-sale. You can go to toberniebook.com to see a lot of great blurbs from a lot of my great coworkers and see some insides on what happened in the Bernie Sanders campaign. You can follow me on Twitter at Chuck Rocha, and Nuestro PAC that we talked about that is currently raising money to put these ads up is nuestropac.com. Thank you again for having me.
And you can find all of our research at Equis Research, EQUIS Research.us. Follow us on Twitter at Equis Research. We do a lot of writing on Medium of analysis of the Latino electorate. And I spend a lot of time pontificating and thinking about what the electorate is at stephanievalenc on Twitter.
And you can find me in Congress or on Twitter at Castro for Congress. See y'all.
Wow, I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I am just absolutely blown away, and I'm definitely coming out of it, even though I feel like I knew a whole bunch about this topic. I'm coming out of it knowing a lot more. I'm also coming out of it, I guess you would say, with my priors confirmed. My priors said there is an underinvestment happening still within this community. And when I, looking out as an outsider, I look at the Southwest, I look at Arizona and what happened there. And, we know for sure that the motivation of Latino voters in Arizona, it's a negative partisanship model, actually, and it has more to do than just this Donald Trump effect. It actually is the backlash of Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who, should be a felon for violating human rights, civil rights, but Donald Trump, pardoned him. It's just such an embarrassment for the country internationally to have that pardon on our record. But his behavior and treatment of people of Latino origin during really his reign of terror as sheriff in Maricopa County of Arizona, which is the big population hub of Arizona, combined with just the behavior of the Arizona, the Republican Party obviously had dominated Arizona government. And they used that power in that Tea Party rebellion atmosphere that was really backlash about efforts to pass comprehensive immigration reform. They are most famous for passing, the Show Me Your Papers bill, which essentially criminalized looking like a Latino, right? The Show Me Your Papers bill, just to fill people in who don't understand or know what that was a law that made it possible for police to stop you just on suspicion of you being an illegal alien. So if you think about that, even though when we think about the demographics of people who are in the U.S. without documentation, so what somebody might call an illegal alien or an undocumented immigrant, I think unfortunately, if we were to get honest answers anyway from many Americans, the image that comes to mind is somebody of Latino origin, and particularly in that area of the country, probably Mexican origin. We know that that's actually a very diverse group. I mean, it certainly is true that the majority is Latino, right? Because we share a border with that area. If we shared a border with China, it would be a different story. So it's true that is the majority group, but it's not universal. So this paper, Show Me Your Papers, and when we think about Arizona and New Mexico, Texas, that California area, that land, as we are increasingly getting to learn, white people took it from Native Americans and Native peoples, and some of those people were not, American in the sense, they were North American, but Mexican American. And so, the ancestry is quite complicated. And so, under this show me your papers notion, the assumption is that somehow you would look at a person and magically have a reason to suspect that they might not be from this country. And so obviously what that means is that you're racially profiling, ethnically, racially profiling people, and you're not stopping white people, right, on the suspicion that, you're a French person that's hiding in America. It's obviously racist, which is why it was, didn't survive court challenges. But what it did do, actually, was it really woke up, I think, the Arizona Latino community to just how, unfortunately, bigoted elements of that Republican Party was. And it began to get them organized politically, because unfortunately, when groups are pressured politically, that's when they start to turn towards the political process to pressure back. And now we're seeing the fruits of that labor. We saw it first manifest, I think really actually honestly in 2016, when the state came very close for Clinton. And frankly, under my model and theory, if we were to rerun that election under this environment, be a different story, even though Clinton still has the negatives that she has and whatnot. But anyway, so organization and the energy and the mobilization and the voter file building and all of that effort has just been compounding, and it really bore fruit for the first time in 2018 when Kristen Sinema was elected, and they finally, flipped a seat in a statewide office, a major federal one, and a Democrat became a senator from the state. And now in 2020, they have the opportunity not only to claim the other Senate seat, which Martha McSally is an appointed Republican defending. She actually ran against Sinema for the other Senate seat, lost, and then was appointed to John McCain's vacated seat after he passed away. So that seat is being contested by an incredibly talented Democratic challenger. So that compounds the Republican problems in former NASA astronaut Mark Kelly, who also has the benefit of being Gabby Giffords, who's kind of a political star for terrible reasons in Arizona, having been a victim of a very horrific shooting. But she was a member of Congress that was shot in a public event, and her husband, Mark Kelly, is running for the Senate seat. So it is kind of a perfect storm there, plus Biden is positioned well. So we really may see that seat flip in 2020. In fact, my model is very bullish on that happening. And it really is a product, though, of Latinos getting organized and getting activated for the first time and building and adding to an increasingly Democratic white college educated electorate from that urbanization and really migration of voters coming from other states who are bringing their political attitudes in to the state, kind of how we saw Republicanism come to the South a long time ago. So anyway, that was a really long way of getting around to the point that, we're definitely seeing this, motivated Latino organization now coming outside of Arizona and into Texas. And, really what it takes, I think, too, is the sense of possibility. And I think after 2018, with the Beto O'Rourke candidacy coming so close, I mean, people think about the loss, but, as a person that studies campaigns, I analyze that campaign and see so much about it that was just very, very good. I mean, you could rerun the Beto race in a state that was more competitive, and he's definitely winning that race, right? And then to have done so in a state with really very little previous infrastructure, a decimated statewide Democratic Party, and to see where it is today, I'm really looking at tremendous growth. So we're really looking at an awakened Latino electorate, and it was great to kind of hear from Chuck and from Stephanie and of course the congressman, intimately take us into that community, how it thinks and feels, and how it's thinking about its electoral future. So that was great. And we're going to close out today with no Q&A, like I said, because the episode was very long in terms of the interview. And I know that will bum some of you guys out. We did do the special Q&A episode, and we will catch up. I know good questions are still coming in, and I still have some in the backlog. I appreciate that. So please keep submitting them. But I will give you the answer to the trivia question, which, yay, you guys got. And I have to go with the person that got it first, okay? So several people got it right, but very good. Somebody got it right first, and speed matters. Just to recap, I'm going to reread the question. And the question said, for a while, Alaska kept popping up in our national politics, most famously when John McCain selected a running mate from the state who was so obscure. There was really a delay of several hours before articles other than "Who is Sarah Palin" could be posted up on the internet. Reporters fled to the state or flocked to Wasilla and Juneau. Flocked to Wasilla and Juneau to Alaska to find out who this newly minted Republican vice presidential nominee was and more about her. But Palin wasn't the only thing McCain put on the nation's radar from Alaska. Because of that race, what other major Alaska political headline came to the nation's attention that was connected to the Palin pick? And then I gave a hint that it had prompted a major congressional reform that is still having a massive impact on Congress today. And maybe I should have not gone with the hint because a lot of people got the answer. So what's funny is the person who got it right first, guess what his name is? I'm not even kidding. It's Bill O'Reilly. Like, I was like, wait a minute, that Bill O'Reilly? And Flip's like, no, not that Bill O'Reilly. And the reason I know is because it's an old buddy of mine who's actually distantly related to William Buckley, who's the founder of the Republican Party. So that's kind of funny. But yeah, no, it's not that Bill O'Reilly. And you know how we would know is because Bill O'Reilly is, he doesn't write those books, people. Like other people write those books for him. You know that, right? Yeah, he would never know that. So anyway, so Bill O'Reilly, not that Bill O'Reilly. The other one is the big winner. He's getting the very first, trivia prize, election whisperer mug. I don't even have one. So when we get him yours, I'm going to get one for me and try to feature it on the show. And I'm so excited. I'm glad the question worked out. I'm going to come up with a good one for this week, and it's going to go up. It should be up. Actually, it's up right now. Flip would say it's up right now because when this post, it will be up. So maybe that was just a little bit of a clue too specific, but in any case, several of you should be very proud of yourselves, but there's no, like I said, no participation trophies on the Election Whisperer. So, but of course the answer is A Bridge to Nowhere. I should probably mention that. That is the most famous bridge project that got focused on because it was a big amount of money that had been requested for Alaska by Alaska's senator, which was earmarked, and this is a thing called earmarking for Alaska. Earmarking was a process in Congress in which a member could add on as a rider onto any bill, little tiny spending things to, pay for things in their home district if it was the House, or in their state if it was the Senate. Earmarks were extremely important in Congress, and the reason why is because they actually, if you think about a engine or like a bicycle, something with gears, like they provided the grease that made the wheels turn, okay? Because let's say like there was a bill and it wasn't so great and I was a little iffy about it. If I could add in, $1 million to redo the library steps in my district though, well, that would help me grease the wheels. And the problem is like you could always find stuff in the earmarking process to fixate on and talk about as a waste. And especially if you happen to be Republicans, right? I mean, you're always looking at stuff in the budget to exploit against Democrats or your primary opponent. And at that time period, as you can remember, is when the Tea Party type like atmosphere is beginning in the Republican Party. So, earmarks are becoming this political hot potato. The economy is in shatters. And the bridge to nowhere as this earmark, why are we building a bridge on which 10 people live on this island that's going to cost, I remember it, $100 million. And it became like basically the poster child for earmarks. That and feeding monkeys cocaine to study what their brains do when they're high, So what happened was when the Republicans had their giant wave after killing the economy, and then they picked up 63 seats in the House because they were amazing at electioneering and messaging, one of the things that they ran on, and certainly one of the things that, the Tea Party like wave challengers were fighting for was earmark reform. And so Boehner, who was John Boehner, who was ushered in as the House Speaker under that Republican Revolution, he stripped out earmarks. It was a major institutional reform. It was celebrated, honestly, both on the left and the right because of, like I said, they were abused. I mean, they were obviously abused. It's just in hindsight, they really helped shit get done in Congress. And then we go into this decade we're looking back on now, in which the legislative process grinds to a halt. Now, it's definitely not just because of earmarks. It's because the Republican opposition comes in and they develop a strategic plan to tank Obama's presidency by not letting him achieve things. It's a very smart political plan. In fact, I'm probably hanging out with the dudes that came up with it on the Lincoln Project. I'll have to ask them if any of them are the brainchild of that strategic plan. If not, I'm sure they know who is, because somebody came up with the plan. Hey, you know what? If you just frustrate via the Senate filibuster and control the House, whatever Obama's legislative goals are, his voters will get pissed off because they don't understand the process. All they'll know is that he's not getting the things done he said he would do. It's this thing called the expectations gap. It's the gap between what the president promised on the stump and what he can deliver. It's always there because the system is set up that way, but we can exasperate it and really hurt him. And, we've never seen before in American politics a party purposely exploit and expand the expectations gap for political gain, and that's what the Republican Party did, and it's just a fact, right? And we, have had reporting that has verified that. Boehner, ironically, really came to regret probably the obstruction plan because it was terrible for the country and ultimately terrible for the Republican Party. But also, I think he came to regret the removal of earmarks, because without them, you just don't have a way to massage your members into cooperation, especially on that side of the aisle, which is a harder, group of people to get towards cooperation. And frankly, there is more of them. They really did form a formidable opposition on that side. And replacing with Paul Ryan really didn't make any difference. So earmarks gone, but not forgotten. At least not here on the Election Whisperer. I also am excited to remind you that next week I'm so excited. I have Zerlina Maxwell coming on my show. Oh my gosh, she's one of my sheroes. Why is she one of my sheroes? Because she is not afraid to tell it like it is and hurt people's feelings in the process, politely and nicely, like in a gentle way, like a tough medicine, tough love kind of way. And boy, does she do it in this book, which is brand new. And you should go onto Amazon right now and get it so that you have time to read it before the show. And you can submit questions, actually, if you want to, directly on this book. And if I see some in there, I will try to pull it into the interview that I have with her, because I don't film that, before next week. So get those in. And her name, or her book's name, is The End of White Politics, which is a pretty provocative title. And what she is arguing is that Democrats actually should lean in to identity politics. And, interestingly enough, and when we get to like the wonky off season when campaigning's not so intense, I'm going to have some political scientists, like really it's going to get pretty wonky, onto the show. And one of them I'm hoping will come on is a fellow female political scientist named Ashley Jardina, who has a thesis and a book that argues that white people have developed identity politics, a white racial identity. Usually identity politics have been reserved for people who, are racial minorities, but white people have been kind of tricked into thinking they're, an aggrieved, repressed minority group. And so Ashley's research shows that. But we're talking right now about this thesis. And so, since white people have identity politics, we might as well lean in. And what Zerlina has worked on 2 campaigns, both Hillary Clinton's and Barack Obama's. So she's got a ton of, on site, like practitioner experience in the world. But she's also in charge of progressive programming, I think, on Sirius satellite radio, which has just gotten such an amazing diversity of voices. When you hear progressive programming, you probably think of, Bernie Sanders, but there's a ton of diversity in that offering. So if you've never checked out Sirius satellite radio, you should really check that out. But anyway, she is arguing in this book that, Democrats have been running away. I mean, it's kind of similar to the stuff I argue. It's distinct, but it's similar insofar as she's saying, lean in, stop being embarrassed about who you are, lean into this majority minority identity that Democrats increasingly have. And I am so excited to have her come and do an intense interview, kind of batting ideas around, talking about, I don't know, kind of being, the person that, everyone kind of hates because you're never you're never getting all the love from one group when you're always willing to criticize everybody equally. So it's nice to have a fellow person who's in that group, because it can be a little sad when it'd be nice to have just one group that always loved me, and I'm sure Zerlina can relate to that. So it's going to be a great conversation. I'm so excited to have her on the show. I'm going to try not to squeal like a little girl and embarrass myself. So anyway, great times, and it's been a great episode. I will see you next week.